tell the couple before a wedding, if everything goes perfectly, nobody will remember. It is what it is. You know, this is a pretty good crowd considering. And you've got people out front.
I don't have to
And you
control
didn't,
the people.
yeah. And you didn't have to put yourself on the line to get them.
People are still out there walking.
I tell you what, I will wait until about 1 after, and then I will ding.
I'm going to take my medicine.
Yep. You know what? I can announce the song, or you can announce it.
Why don't you do it?
Okay.
Spirit of life. It's on the monitor. And I'll do reading.
Folks stand for those things.
I think it's a nice thing.
Okay, well, wait until I was ready. Now, this is wow, it worked. I invite you to open our service by standing as you're so inclined, willing, and able, and joining in our opening song, number 123, Spirit of Life.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm Pat Wellington. I'm on the Board of Trustees here and just returned from Italy. I'm still tired, but it's good to see so many of you here. This is UCOV, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Venice, Florida, where we strive to be a church home where all can find a welcome, regardless of your race, religious beliefs, gender expression, whom you love, etc. We celebrate our differences as we learn from one another, and we're guided by 7 principles that you can find online at ucov.org. I wonder if we have any visitors today. Okay. Do we have, we have somebody in the back? Yes. Would you introduce yourselves if you care to and tell us where you're from?
We're both students of Lisa Frank.
Ah, wonderful. The students of Lisa Frank are here to hear her play piano. Welcome. Someone else here.
Marilyn Breed, I'm at Village on the Isle, and I've come here before. It's a lovely church.
Marilyn Breed from Village on the Isle. Welcome. And do we have people who are leaving today for up north for the summer? Oh, there goes Linda. Linda, you're still here, huh? Linda Underwood in the back row, and Bill Dowling, you're going soon? Well, we wish you a good summer. We're going to miss you folks. And whom else? Oh, look it. There's Judith Parker. Where are you going, Judith?
Upper Michigan.
Upper Michigan. Well, we wish you a very good trip, everyone. Also, our offering will be given during announcements, but we don't have but one announcement today. The Meatless Monday, which was for tomorrow evening at Waters Hall, has been canceled. We are wearing masks now in the sanctuary and other facilities due to the rise of COVID, and we felt it was best to do that. So this month, keep an eye out for future ones. We'll figure that out as the time comes. Now I'd like to introduce our pianist, Lisa Frank, and she's going to play Arabesque No. 1 by Claude Debussy.
Let us not worship things that break, unless perhaps we worship one another's hearts. Let us not worship temporary things, unless that is, we worship the love that nests between two loving, temporary human beings. Life comes and then it goes. Is that not itself the human key to transcendence, that on a planet which long after us will depart and decay itself, with which even the life-giving sun will expire with time, and yet we can still exalt the greatness of it all, the marvelous, fragile impermanence of it all, and look into one another's eyes and see the things that really matter. The caring we extend, the loneliness we breach, the love and justice for which we strive in the little time we have. These echo and shine, calls to be answered, lights to steer by, leaving a kind of sweetness that drifts through the ages. Come, let us worship together. And I'll light the chalice. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us. And I invite you to stand as you're willing and able and join in singing our opening hymn this morning, number 140, Hail the Glorious Golden City. Seated. And we're kind of jockeying around the order of service this morning. We're doing the time before we had a non-scheduled occurrence. The time for all ages was going to occur early, and we don't have any kids here this morning, but we're going to do this for children of all ages because there's a film clip I wanted to show you. If you can bring this up. This is E.W. Griffith's 1916 movie, Intolerance. And of course, they have titles. It's a silent movie. This is a live... I mean, this is nothing when you have computer graphics. But they didn't. That is a live set. There's more than 1,000 people on that set, each making $5 a day, which was a pretty good wage in 1916. A lot of money being spent there, and for this scene, Griffith had to invent the first real camera crane. He built an elevator, mounted a camera on the elevator, and then mounted the elevator on railroad tracks so that he could go down and shoot in. Zoom wasn't very good at the time. Then he can go back up and shoot out. In a time, 1915, 1916, when producers were by no means sure that people would even watch a movie more than a half hour long, both The Birth of a Nation and Intolerance were more than 3 hours long, and people actually flocked to see both of them. Unfortunately, Griffith was only 40 years old when he was making these movies. But after about 1920, 1925, he never had another successful movie, and he died alone. Not broke, he made a lot of money, so he had some left, but he died alone because he wasn't able to change with the times. He made very sentimental movies, what he thought was dramatic and educational, and when the jazz age hit, folks wanted jazzier movies. He insisted on sending out an orchestra. He had a full symphony written to go with each movie, and insisted on sending out an orchestra to play in the theaters. You know, the image of a silent movie is the pianist in the corner, right? Like Lisa, playing the piano and watching what's going on and playing music. And that's the way most movies were. He insisted on hiring orchestras to play when his movies were shown and things like that. So it was hard to make money under those circumstances. And of course, studios remember that. So his inability to adapt to changing times, that he was very successful for about 10 years. And then after that, it was one, even though, and also, all of his movies were kind of the same movie. He almost always would end with some kind of cliffhanger, with the cavalry riding to the rescue or the hero charging to the rescue. And, that's very exciting the first time you edit it together. It's very thrilling. But about the 5th or 6th time, people know what's coming, and it's not exciting anymore. And he never figured that out. So, genius he was in some ways. And that's the lesson. You can be really smart in some ways, not so much in other ways. Genius that he was in some ways, he couldn't change with the changing times in Hollywood. And so that even though he's certainly renowned for his early movies, he never made a successful movie after 1925, and after about 1930 or 32, he stopped making them altogether and went home to Kentucky. So that was what I was going to tell the kids, and then I was going to tell them to have fun and learn something. And we can still work on that. In the meantime, though, I can learn how to use the mic, or not. I have a responsive reading. As always, I'll read the straight type, and I invite you to respond with the boldface type. A life of faith demands so much more of us than mere belief.
The life of faith means to live in a way that challenges greed and heedlessness.
It is to live in a way that accepts fear and setbacks as a part of life.
Yet still always confronts with courage, while in the face of the world's ignorance and injustice.
A life of faith does not pretend that we are without doubt. Thank you, and I invite you to join in singing our choral response this morning, number 374. Since what we choose is what we are, and what we are we yet shall be, the goal may ever shine afar. The will to win it sets us free. This is the time in our service when we acknowledge the high points and low points, the trials and triumphs of our lives. So if you have a celebration to share, raise your hand and I'll bring the mic to you. I have one. Kate's coming Monday, and she'll be here for a few days.
Jean Spitzer. John and I are leaving Tuesday to fly back to Sacramento, California, be with grandchildren and daughter and son out there and their children. So I just wanted to let each of you know that this community at UCOV and everything that each of you contribute to the character of the congregation is very meaningful in my life and John's. We will miss this. We'll have to Zoom Dennis for this rest of the month. Wouldn't miss his erudite lectures and having fun and learning something. And now to honor each of you, as Roy Rogers and Dale Evans sang, happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling now and then. Who cares if it's dark and rainy weather? What matters is that we stick together. Happy trails to you till we meet again.
Wow. Nice touch.
I'm Donna Jewett. I just looking out here out of the sanctuary window, and if you look closely, you'll see our new pollinating garden. You'll see the butterflies come here. We saw 5 caterpillars on one of the milkweeds out here, and I said, yay, they're coming, and they're enjoying it. And so just enjoy this beauty, and we thank the gardening team and the Green Sanctuary team. We all got together to put this, to make it happen, so thank you.
Here, here. This is a gesture I learned from the youth, by the way. That's yes and that's no. So this just means I'm agreeing.
Hi, this isn't a political announcement, but I just wanted to let people know that Venice City Council is planning to go ahead with raising the height limits on our buildings in downtown Venice. So if you're interested trying to prevent that, the meeting is tomorrow at 5 o'clock at the Venice City Council meeting. Thank you.
I got one over there, and then I'll be back. I'm trying to hit them in the order received. I get more exercise that way.
Hi, I'm Tom Reeves. As my wife Pat mentioned at the beginning of the service, yes, we just got back from 2 weeks in Italy. And in case you were worried, the antiquities are still there. And we saw a lot throughout the entire country. The only bad part was it was hot. And in the last 3 days in Rome, it was 95 degrees. But we all tested negative, so we all got home. And that's the good news.
Well, I'll be there.
Since someone else made a not-so-political announcement, I just wanted to remind everyone that next Saturday, There will be a March for Our Lives march in downtown Sarasota if you're willing to go up there and show support for our young people that are trying to keep guns out of schools.
This, was it you, Sal, or was it? Yeah, okay.
My niece Rosalie Michaels came in 5th in Miss Arizona contest a week ago. Her mother won Miss Arizona contest several years ago. They're both gorgeous women, let me tell you.
Just a few quick remarks. I missed the book group for the discussion on Search by Michelle Humeven, and there are 2 copies that I bought. Barbara Smith had one, and I think I gave one to Edna Robinson. I hope those will stay in circulation for those people who wish to read it. And second, I'm looking for Dale Povenmire. Is he here today? There he is, quietly. He told me last weekend that his birthday is arriving. I don't know what number it is, Dale, but it's on the 6th of June, and he has his 3 children coming to visit him around this time. So that was wonderful. And final thing, I had a request from somebody recently. You know, how do you load Breeze onto your cell phone or even access the site on UChive's website? So perhaps there's a techie person after the service. My tutorial came from Pamela originally. So Pam, if you'll volunteer, maybe after the service, if people want an uptick on that, in terms of putting Breeze at easy access, that would be available.
Hi, I'm Barbara Griffin, and my husband and I haven't been here very much since we moved to Village on the Isle. And I know many of you know that our daughter Karen moved to Atlanta about a year ago. And we're excited that the kids are all going to come to visit next week, not this coming week, but the week after. So we will have the kids with us for about 3 days, and that'll be a lot of fun. We're looking forward to it.
Tell them hi for me.
After Jean spoke, I just wanted to notice, I have learned on Breeze, those of you who are on Breeze, when we send an email through Breeze, and I send one out recently, some time ago, often they go to your spam folder the first time. So take a look at your spam folder every once in a while. If you pull it up from your spam folder, it won't go to your spam folder after that. But I was concerned many people didn't respond to an email I sent in February or April, and now I understand why.
My son Seth Marcusa begins a 2-year hitch as second in command of the Navy, United States Navy in Bahrain, and was just appointed commander.
Congratulations.
Since somebody called me out for being 92, I wanted to say I've got my son here.
Happy. Oh my, a lot going on. Concerns. We've had semi-concerns. Do we have concerns this morning?
I'm standing up a lot today. However, I want to honor the life of a young woman, age 29, who had mental struggles, serious head injury as a child, and not so very long ago, whenever things were very dark in her life, she went back to drugs. And we had a call from her father, who is a really long-time and dear friend, to say that she'd OD'd, and an older sister found her. So it was a time of sorrow, knowing that the family would be grieving, but at the same time, truly a scary reminder of the dangers that exist for young people out there. And it sometimes feels absolutely overwhelming, the demons that lurk out there.
Hello, I'm Judith Parker. I recently had a phone call from Enid Hill, who used to be here. She's lonely, and I think it would be really nice if some of her UCall friends reached out to her. She's in Illinois. She went up with her son. But if you are interested, speak to me afterwards or whatever. Send me an email, and I will send you her contact information.
So go the trials and triumphs of our lives, and of course both the price and the benefit of life is that we feel it. We lift, well, if I can figure out how to take off one article at a time here. We lift up those who struggle and who suffer. We rejoice with those who have reached milestones or have enjoyed achievements. We hold within our hearts all who suffer or grieve. We pray each in our own way into the silence. The hopes in this community are offered forth in the names of all those who have gone before, in the names of all those who will come after, in the names of all the helpers of humankind. Shalom, salam, blessed be, and amen. Our reading this morning is from the late film critic Roger Ebert. He finally got around to writing a review of The Birth of a Nation. Of course, by then he was a legendary film critic, and he described his discomfort with director D.W. Griffith's movie, which had also become legendary by that time, The Birth of a Nation, after admitting that he had put off watching Griffith's movie for years due to his reluctance to confront its racism. Then he wrote, quote, "Griffith demonstrated to every filmmaker and moviegoer who followed him what a movie was and what a movie could be, and that this achievement was made in a film marred by racism should not be surprising as a nation once able to reconcile democracy with slavery. America has a stain on its soul. To understand our history, we must begin with the contradiction that the Founding Fathers believed all men, except for black men, were created equal and deserved freedom. Griffith will probably never lose his place in the pantheon of great filmmakers, but there will always be the blot of the later scenes of Birth of a Nation. It is a stark history lesson to realize that this film, for many years the most popular ever made, expressed what at the time were widely held and generally acceptable white views. Actress Lillian Gish reveals more than she realizes when she quotes Griffith's paternalistic reply to accusations that he was anti-Negro. He said, To say that is like saying I'm against children, as they were our children, whom we loved and cared for all our lives. And unfortunately, to the folks that came to hear Lisa, you're getting me for the interlude this morning. Back in my college days, a lifetime ago, I was introduced to Geoffrey Chaucer, and I like to share the prologue to his Canterbury Tales every spring, and we've still got a couple of weeks of spring left, technically anyway. So I'll share it with y'all. Years and years later, like 600 years later, I set his poetry to music. But it's you know, you can he's way in the public domain, so I can get away with that. But it is still the original 600-year-old Middle English, and it's a lot of fun to sing, and I hope it's fun to listen to. One April with his shore sota, the drocht of March hath persed to the rota, and bathed every vein in switch liqueur, of which vertu ungenred is the floor. When Zephyr sake with his sweet breath, inspired hath in every holt and heath, the tendre croppes and the young sun, hath in the ram his halve corsair run, and smaller foolish mackin melody, that slepen all the nicht with open ear, so pricketh him nature in ear courages, then longen folk to go on pilgrimages, and palmers forward to saken straunges strondes, to fern the hallways, couth in sundry landes, and specially from every shiros end of England, to Canterbury they vend, their holy blissful martyr for to sake, that him hath holpen when that they were sake. And the words mean, the month of April has a sweet, sweet rain that showers down on mountain, heath, and plain. It soaks into the ground like heaven's wine and gives birth to the flower and the vine. The gentle breezes kiss across the land, caress new planted crops with loving hand. The air is fresh and clean, and everyone goes forth anew beneath a smiling sun. The little birds all lose themselves in song and sleep with both eyes open all night long, because the season's joy excites them so. And that's when folk on pilgrimages go. The rich set sail unto the land of palms to pledge devotion and to give their alms, while lesser folk of England turn their feet toward Canterbury to show their faith complete. To Thomas Becket's grave they make their way, the saint whose love can heal the sick, they say. Befell that in that cessin on a die, in Southwark at the tabard as he lie, full ready to venden on me pilgrimage, toward Canterbury with full devout courage. At nicht was common to that hostelria, full 29 in a compagnie of sundry folk, be aventuri fall, in fellowship and pilgrimis were they all. They chanced to fall into fellowship, and pilgrims were they all, as are we all, diverse pilgrims to a common destination. It was good for me. I hope it was good for you. I used to read that without the music to my daughter when she was like a year or 18 months old, because it's just such a full body experience, Middle English is. I was having fun. I don't know if she was. Okay, this is the first of 4 sermons that will use movies as lenses into our cultural subconscious. If critical race theory is analysis of how racism is embedded in our nation's legal structure, I'm going to explore cultural attitudes that are embedded in the history of movies. Racism isn't the only cultural attitude we can analyze by looking at old films, but it is definitely one of them. What I'm trying to do actually comes under the heading of sociology of film. We can learn a lot about what makes any society tick by watching its old movies. Old movies show us attitudes the director and crew may not even have realized they had, but looking back at them 50 or 100 years later, they stick out like sore thumbs. And that includes our deep cultural roots in racism and patriarchalism. The older the movie, the more we see truly cringe-inducing attitudes. Now, going in, I also need to mention one scholarly theory about film, what's called auteur theory. Auteur theory holds that major directors, the Steven Spielberg, Stanley Kubricks, Martin Scorsese's, and so on, tend to have distinctive styles of their own, so that you can analyze one director's work for common themes and how that director does things. And that certainly applies to America's first truly great film director, David Wark Griffith, better known as D.W. Griffith. He began directing movies in 1908, was one of the founders of the Hollywood filmmaking industry, and did more than anyone else to set the standard for the Hollywood blockbuster movie. Before Griffith, the earliest movies looked like theater plays with the camera set up in place of the theater audience. Griffith began to move the camera, shooting from high or low angles, tracking individual characters' actions, and innovations such as camera cranes. You saw the first real camera crane shot just now. Tracking shots, the dolly, the pan, camera angles, intercut chase scenes, rescue scenes, a great many tropes that we now take for granted, all evolved by way of Griffith. That basically, by the time he was done, the basic, what we call visual grammar of films was in place. We've been adjusting it ever since. But most of it came by way of Griffith, and most of all, he developed film editing. Depending on how you splice different shots together, the same basic collection of film or video can tell radically different stories. And film scholars, teachers, have actually done that, spliced together a famous sequence from a movie scene, like a famous chase scene or something, to make it look like the other person was chasing the chasing person in the original movie. When someone talks about the director's cut of a movie now, that's what they're talking about. And we take all that for granted now. But such techniques were revolutionary in the early 1900s. And yet, as film critic Roger Ebert noted, Griffith used his genius to push the worst kind of violence, racial bigotry, patriarchalism, and homophobia without ever realizing how bigoted he actually was. Southern-born, he never questioned his own racial assumptions, nor did most other white people. The whole country was nearly as prejudiced as he was. I don't believe Griffith himself ever really understood the social and emotional powers with which he was so adroitly and yet heedlessly playing, or how dangerous that was. Flawed though our own times are, it's easy to forget how all-encompassing patriarchalism and racial prejudice were 100 years ago. Griffith and most of his audiences saw non-European or even Eastern or Southern European races as inferior. Men were strong, women were dependent, silly, helpless, sometimes dangerous. People with disabilities were always objects of pity or ridicule, as was anyone who didn't fit into a standard heteronormative gender mold. Griffith's 1915 Civil War epic, The Birth of a Nation, is a study in the real power of film. As entertainment, it was decades ahead of its time. Studios in 1915, as I said, were nervous about whether an audience would even watch a film for more than a half hour. The Birth of a Nation and Griffith's follow-up epic, Intolerance, ran more than 3 hours each, and audiences flocked to see them. To the modern viewer, though, the most striking feature of The Birth of a Nation, beyond epic Civil War battle scenes and dated film techniques, is its mind-boggling racism. Almost all black speaking roles were played by white actors in ludicrous blackface makeup. Time and again, Griffith portrayed black men lusting after white women. But society's paranoia about black sexuality was so intense at the time that those scenes could only be filmed with an unmistakably white male actor wearing blackface makeup. Even as it was, the movie so enraged white audiences that they often went on to attack innocent black citizens and destroy black-owned property. And even today, people talking about the effect of the movie often talk about the disquiet and even riots it caused among people of color, but don't talk about the lethal results upon people of color. That gets left out. But Harvard economics professor Desmond Ang surveyed old newspapers and found a 5-fold increase in lynchings right after Birth of a Nation would play in a county. In Griffith's version of the post-Civil War South, freed blacks take over Southern state legislatures and enact laws oppressing white citizens. The depictions of black lawmakers are most remarkable for their grotesquerie. The defeated Southern menfolk are reduced to passivity until, as Griffith tells us in an intertitle, quote, "The Ku Klux Klan became the organization that saved the South from the anarchy of black rule," close quote. If you think we've completely done away with that kind of racism, though, listen to white pundits and politicians talk now about what they're now calling replacement theory. The rhetoric is amazingly similar. The post-Civil War Ku Klux Klan had faded away after about 1880 and was almost non-existent when The Birth of a Nation came out. Within 10 years, with Griffith's box office hit as a recruiting tool, Klan membership skyrocketed. More than 5 million men by 1925 across the Midwest and South, with a women's auxiliary of nearly 100,000. Ironically, the bigotry across American society was so huge as to render it invisible. The Birth of a Nation broke all box office records and was the first movie specially shown at the White House. And it should not be surprising that it won raves from White House staff as well, including Virginia-born President Woodrow Wilson, and he later denied it. But Griffith kept the letter that Wilson gave him for the rest of his life. The movie's racism may seem disgusting now, but it bothered few white people at the time, and it's always worth asking. This is the important question. What will future generations say about us 100 years into our society's future? What kinds of injustices do we accept or even defend without really thinking about it? In our day, discrimination against the marginalized takes more subtle form, and yet today, most people, including many a professed liberal, when confronted about their prejudice or insensitivity, still express the same kind of bewilderment and resentment that Griffith did. White fragility has only changed in degree in 100 years. Speaking of white fragility, when the newly formed NAACP called for The Birth of a Nation to be banned, which was an understandable reaction, Griffith responded with an angry 45-page self-published pamphlet titled The Rise and Fall of Free Speech in America. He complained that his freedom of artistic expression was being censored. The Birth of a Nation was the most profitable film ever made. It remained the top grossing film in history until long after Griffith died. And in fact, in 1961, I was 11 years old. Gone with the Wind was re-released because of the centennial of the Civil War. Birth of a Nation was still the top grossing movie of all time. Black people were not even allowed in 1915 to sit with white movie audiences, and black youths could and did suffer severe beatings or death just for setting foot on a white beach or drinking from a white drinking fountain. Now, you would think that people wouldn't need to feel fragile under those circumstances, but that's not how white fragility works. D.W. Griffith wrote that he felt persecuted and censored, those were the words he used, because a few people, mostly blacks, didn't like his movie. Now, you can find his pamphlet online. And it starts out in capital letters, "Why censor the motion picture The Laboring Man's University?" And he then goes on to say, "The motion picture can carry the truths of history to the entire world without cost, while at the same time bringing diversion to the masses. As the cheerless existence of millions would be brightened by this new art, two of the chief causes of war would be removed. The motion picture is war's greatest antidote." Close quote. In addition to those accusations of censorship, he then concludes, now get this, "If I approach success in what I am trying to do in my coming picture, Intolerance, I expect a persecution even greater than that which met the Birth of a Nation." That's baloney. It's a perfect example of how much self-pity a successful white businessman can show responding to any criticism by saying that he is the one being persecuted and censored. Now, in 100 years, the degree of racism has certainly diminished. In America, as recent reports on police brutality in Minneapolis and elsewhere show, though, it does still exist. But white responses when our white privilege gets challenged have really changed very little. The level of defensiveness, silly though it is when viewed from a distance, is still with us. White fragility is nothing new. Only the terminology is new. Some film critics and historians, Roger Ebert included, suggest that Griffith made his next epic, Intolerance, as a kind of apology for the Birth of a Nation. But if Griffith's pamphlet isn't enough to prove otherwise, the opening scenes of Intolerance do. Griffith's message right from the beginning is that society's problems do not rise from, say, racial intolerance or Jim Crow or even slavery. The real troublemakers were the uplifters, as he called them, self-satisfied, power-hungry do-gooders who trigger injustice, death, and destruction in a, but for them, happy world. Now, Griffith's language here is deeply problematic and racist on its face. Black intellectuals from George Washington Carver to W.E.B. Du Bois advocated what they often termed racial uplift, that blacks who gain some position in society should use their relative advantage to uplift their struggling siblings of color. They had different opinions how black people might gain more equality. Carver and Du Bois actually disagreed on many points, but that the word uplift had meaning to both makes it an important term. It is therefore inconceivable that Griffith could have been innocently unaware of that term and racial discussions of his day. He either didn't know and didn't care, which condemns him as willfully ignorant, or he did know and chose to ridicule the very ideal, which condemns him as willfully racist. Either way, he had no regard for black hopes and aspirations. And then a few years later, President Wilson commissioned Griffith to make a propaganda film supporting the United States entry into the First World War. Griffith traveled to Europe, and basically he reshot The Birth of a Nation, set this time on the Belgian-French border. Germans became the bloody villains instead of the Yankees and freed blacks, and the French were the heroes. And instead of the Ku Klux Klan riding to the rescue at the end, it was French cavalry. Now, all movies, I love this, all movies were by this time subject to cuts by wartime censors. Griffith didn't complain about that. He did, however, get his film registered not in his own name or in the name of his production company, but as a product of the War Office, the Defense Department of its day. As such, any criticism of his movie could be prosecuted under federal anti-sedition statutes. So much for D.W. Griffith's championship of free speech. Now, I include these details because in our own time, many people, including some Unitarian Universalists criticized for insensitivity toward marginalized identities, go, you might say, full Griffith, accusing their detractors of political correctness run amok, safetyism, cancel culture, censorship, and persecution. The Birth of a Nation and arguably Hearts of the World, Griffith's propaganda movie about the First World War, inspired real hatred toward real people. The Birth of a Nation cost real lives. It's also worth noting that only a year or so after saying that movies were war's greatest antidote, Griffith had turned around and made a movie that forcefully promoted war. To Griffith's dismay, however, President Wilson rejected Hearts of the World because it portrayed Germans as such monsters. It was bad for the peaceful and just settlement that Wilson earnestly sought in post-war negotiations. Portraying American blacks as oversexed animals was one thing. Doing the same to Germans while the president was trying to lead international diplomacy was quite another. And yet, and this is important, white actors and set crews who worked with Griffith agree that he was not unkind, nor was he intentionally racist. He was, they said, sympathetic to good blacks, failing to understand that to him, black goodness could come only through black servility. The profound evil of Griffith's bigotry and that of his society lay not in his intent, but in its effect on the people he harmed. Good intentions did not reduce the death toll, as Professor Ang's work affirms. Marginalization still plays out in real-world violence and economic disadvantage even to our own day. The problem, therefore, lies not in the intent, but in the effect to those who are belittled and degraded, however innocently. And this really does call us to confront what we haven't learned since Griffith's day and the necessary discomfort of challenging today's injustices. It's always more comfortable to look away, which might explain why film historians so often detail the Birth of a Nation's innovations while still glossing over its jaw-dropping racism to this day. If we summon the courage to face the multi-layered ugliness of homophobia, transphobia, patriarchalism, and white supremacy culture, how we ourselves still participate in them. If I face my own discomfort and you face yours, I truly believe we begin to create something sacred. We do not make the world a better place or become better people ourselves by staying in our comfort zones. 100 years after the birth of a nation set box office records, we can now look back and see its evil in full view. It's worth bearing in mind that 100 years from now, people will look back at us, and it's up to us what they see. Blessed be, and amen. And I invite you to rise as you're willing and able, and hopefully sing hymn number 121, We'll Build a Land. We're going to do verses 1, 2, and 4. The chalice is extinguished. Let us be pioneers, seeking a better land, as humanity has ever done through the ages. Let us press forward. Let us dare what seems uncomfortable, emboldened by our faith in a future that can be better than the past. Before us hovers a world of potential, where love, liberty, community, and justice are the standard rather than the exception. Building that world is more than an obligation. It is a privilege to be shared. As we go from this place, may the glow of love and enlightenment guide our way, and may the rhythm of our footsteps soothe and bless the earth so long as we walk upon it. Amen.